I was 29 when I began to see how fragile beauty could be. For many years, people said I was the most beautiful woman in New York. I was always invited to dinners, parties, and weekends in the country. I lived in a world of shining lights and rich people, and I learned early that beauty could open every door. But now I understood something more painful. Beauty could open doors, but it could also close them again if you had no money to hold them open. I was not rich. My parents had once lived well, but bad business and bad habits had destroyed everything. When they died, they left me only my face and my name. Since then, I had lived like a guest in other people's houses, moving from one beautiful room to another, wearing dresses I could barely afford, smiling as if everything were easy. My friends had money, husbands, and homes of their own. I had charm and manners, but charm cannot pay for food, and manners do not buy clothes. Still, I tried to stay calm. I told myself I would marry well. Everyone said I would. There were many rich men around me, and all of them liked to be seen beside me. But liking is not the same as love, and love does not always bring security. I wanted both. I wanted to marry a man who could make me safe, but also one I could care for. It sounded simple when I was 20, but now it felt like walking on a thin rope between two cliffs. One afternoon, I took the train to Bellemont, the country home of the Trenors, a rich couple who liked to fill their house with guests every weekend. The train was full of elegant people going to the same place. I looked out of the window, pretending to read, but my thoughts were heavy. I was meeting Lawrence Selden there, a man who was neither rich nor suitable, but who made me feel alive. I had known him for years. He understood my world, but did not live by its rules. He could see behind my smile, and that frightened me. Before we continue, I would love to know, where are you listening from? Which city, which country? Share it in the comments. And if you are enjoying this story, please subscribe to hear more every week. When I arrived at the house, everything was already shining. The music, the dresses, the laughter, it all sounded perfect, as if life were made of light. I smiled, as I always did, but my heart was tired. The women were talking about jewels, and the men about money. They were all careful, calculating, and cold. I wondered if anyone there ever thought about happiness. Maybe only poor people thought about happiness. That night, I saw Selden again. He was standing near the fire, watching the room with that quiet look I could never forget. He smiled when he saw me, and in that moment, I felt something warm. He was not rich, and he never would be, but he saw me as more than a face. He saw the woman beneath the dress, the one who was afraid of falling. When we spoke, said that beauty should be free, that I should not sell myself to the highest bidder. I laughed softly, but my eyes felt wet. It was easy for him to say, men had choices, women had prices. The next morning, the sunlight came through my window like gold. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how long I could continue this life. I had a few friends who gave me gifts, and I had learned how to seem rich without being rich. But the truth was always there. I had to marry soon or lose everything. My face would not last forever, and beauty without money is like a flower without water. It fades, slowly but surely. At breakfast, I sat next to Percy Gryce, a quiet young man with great wealth. Everyone thought he was shy and dull, but I saw more. He was careful. He wanted a wife who looked perfect and behaved perfectly. I could be that woman for a while. I talked softly, laughed at the right moments, and asked about his books. He liked me. I could see it in the way he watched me when I spoke. I told myself this could be the answer. I could live in comfort, have a house, a future, and no more fear. But when I went for a walk later that day, I saw Selden in the garden, and my heart turned against me. He asked me why I looked sad, and I said I was thinking about choices. He said that the only true choice was to be free. I smiled, but I did not answer. How could I explain to him that freedom was a luxury only the rich could afford? He looked at me for a long time, and I wanted him to take my hand, to tell me that love was enough, but he did not. He turned away, and I felt a sudden coldness. That evening, at dinner, everyone laughed louder than usual. I laughed too, but inside, something had broken. I knew then that I could never live only for love, and yet I could not live without it. My life had become a kind of performance. Every smile was a mask, every word was a plan. And behind it all was fear of losing beauty, of losing place, of becoming invisible. When the weekend ended, I went back to the city. My money was almost gone again. I looked at my reflection in the train window and saw a face still admired by many, but haunted by doubt. I tried to imagine myself married to Percy Gryce, sitting beside him in silence, safe but empty. Then I imagined a life with Selden poor, uncertain but alive. And I realized that neither world truly wanted me. In New York, life moved fast again. I went to more dinners, more parties. I borrowed money to pay debts, promised favors to women I did not trust, and smiled at men I did not love. Everyone around me was pretending to be happy. I became good at pretending too. I told myself I was still young, still beautiful, still able to choose, but I could feel time closing in. One night, I stood by my window and looked at the city lights. They sparkled like stars, but they were not stars. They were the homes of people who belonged somewhere, people who had names on doors and keys in their hands. I had only invitations that ended, and dresses that needed to be returned. I felt like a shadow moving between real lives. Still, I told myself that something would change. Someone would save me. Maybe Selden would come back. Maybe I would make the right choice. I wanted to believe that beauty and goodness could still win in the end. I wanted to believe that love was not a mistake. But deep inside, a quiet voice told me that beauty alone had a price, and one day I would have to pay it. That was the beginning of my fall, though I did not know it then. It started quietly, with a few wrong choices, a few careless debts, and the belief that I could play the game longer than the rest. I was wrong. Before I continue with this story, please like, subscribe, share, and tell me in the comments where you are listening from. Your support means a lot. Now let's continue. After that autumn at Bellamont, my life began to move faster. I returned to New York with a head full of dreams and a heart full of confusion. I told myself that I could still marry well. Percy Gryce had liked me, and I knew I could have made him love me if I had tried harder, but I did not. I had chosen to walk with Selden that afternoon instead of sitting beside Gryce in the garden. It was a small decision, but it changed everything. Percy left Bellamont the next day, and I never saw him again. People soon said I had lost my chance. At first, I pretended not to care. I went to parties, smiled for photographs, and wore dresses more beautiful than ever. But the truth was simple. I had no money left. I owed money for dresses, for rooms, and even for small things like flowers and food. I told myself I could borrow and then repay it when I married. But each month the debts grew, and the rich friends who once adored me began to look away. They liked me best when I was shining, not when I needed help. Mrs. Trenner, my old friend from Bellamont, said she could help me. Her husband, Gus Trenner, understood investments, and she told me he could make a little money for me, quietly. She said he often did that for friends. I wanted to believe her, because I needed help so much. I went to see Gus in his grand library, with its dark walls and heavy curtains. He smiled in a way that made me uneasy, but I told myself it was nothing. He asked me how much I needed, and I said only a little. He said he would take care of it. Weeks passed, and suddenly I had money again. Dresses were paid for, invitations returned, and smiles came back to me. I felt alive again, as if the world had forgiven me. I did not ask where the money came from. I told myself that Gus had invested it wisely. But deep inside, I knew it was not business. He was not a banker. He was a man who expected something in return. I tried to stay away from him, but he continued to invite me to his house. One evening, I went there because his wife was supposed to be home. When I arrived, she was not there. Gus met me at the door, smiling too warmly. I understood then that I had made a terrible mistake. He thought I belonged to him because of the money. He spoke in a low voice and said I should be kind to him now. I felt cold all over. I wanted to leave, but I was afraid of what he might say. I walked out into the night, shaking, and took the first carriage I saw. I cried silently the whole way home. I had not done anything wrong, but I felt ashamed. In the world I lived in, appearances were everything. If people believed I had taken money from a man, they would think I had sold myself. Truth did not matter. Gossip did. Soon the whispers began. Women who once kissed my cheek now looked away at parties. Men smiled differently. I could feel the change, slow and cruel, like a shadow growing behind me. I tried to go to Selden, to tell him everything, but when I reached his door, I lost my courage. What could I say? That I had accepted money from another man? That I had gone to his house at night? Even if it was innocent, it would not sound that way. So I turned back and told myself I would fix it alone. But the world was not kind. I had no family to protect me, no husband to defend me. Each month I sold a piece of jewelry, then another. I stopped going to expensive places. My dresses grew old. I began to see the pity in people's eyes, and pity was worse than gossip. It was the slow death of pride. Then came a cruel twist. A woman I had once trusted, Bertha Dorset, invited me to travel with her and her husband. She said it would be good for me to rest, to escape the city. I thought maybe I could start again, and I agreed. We sailed to Europe, and for a short time I felt peaceful. But Bertha was not kind. She used me as a cover for her own affairs. When her husband grew suspicious, she turned on me to protect herself. She told everyone that I had come between them. When we returned to New York, the story spread quickly. People did not ask if it was true. They simply believed it because they wanted to believe something bad. It made them feel cleaner. The invitations stopped coming. My name was no longer welcome in drawing rooms. I was alone. For a few weeks, I stayed in a small hotel room and told myself that things would change. But change never came. One afternoon, I saw Selden on the street. He looked at me with concern, but he did not stop. Perhaps he thought I would be ashamed. Perhaps he was right. I wanted to call his name, but the words did not come. I stood there watching him walk away until he was gone in the crowd. I tried to find work. I told myself I could teach, or design dresses, or do something useful. But the world I knew had not taught me real skills. I only knew how to charm and how to survive in rooms filled with laughter. I found a job making hats in a small shop. The pay was little, but it was something. I sat at a wooden table, my hands moving slowly, my back aching, my mind empty. The women around me did not know who I was. To them, I was only another tired worker. At night, I walked back to my room through dark streets. Sometimes I passed the great houses where I had once been a guest. I saw the lights through the windows, the music, the laughter. Once I saw Bertha Dorset step out of a carriage in a fur coat, smiling as if nothing had happened. I stopped and looked at her, and for the first time I felt nothing. Not hate, not envy, only a kind of quiet emptiness. I thought again about Selden. I wondered if he ever thought of me. I believed he had loved me once, but perhaps love had limits. Perhaps he wanted a woman untouched by scandal, someone safe. I was not safe anymore. I was a name whispered in corners. Sometimes, at night, I dreamed of the sea. I saw myself standing on a ship's deck, the wind in my hair, free at last from all the games and lies. But when I woke, the gray walls of my room were all around me. My beauty was fading now. I could see it in the mirror. The light that once brought me every pleasure now brought me pain. I had built my life on my face, and now it was leaving me. Still, I tried to stay calm. I told myself that dignity was all I had left. If I could not live like them, I would at least not beg like them. I would not return to anyone who had hurt me. I wanted to leave the world with some grace, even if no one noticed. Each day, I grew quieter. The noise of the city no longer touched me. I began to feel that I was living in a dream that had gone too long. Sometimes I looked out at the sunset and thought of how beautiful the light could be, even when it was dying. That was the truth of my life. Beauty had opened every door, but it had not kept me warm. It had given me love for a moment and loneliness forever. And though I still hoped for a letter, a message, or even a kind word from someone who remembered me, none came. The world had moved on. I was forgotten. But one night, I decided that I would see Selden one last time. I needed to tell him the truth before it was too late. It was a cold night when I decided to visit Selden. I had been thinking of him for days, remembering the calm look in his eyes and the way he once said that happiness should come from within. I did not know if he still cared for me, but I wanted to see him one last time. There were things I needed to say, not to change the past, but to make peace with it. I put on my best dress, though it was no longer new, and wrapped a thin coat around my shoulders. The streetlights shone on the wet pavement as I walked to his building. When I reached his door, I stopped. My heart was beating fast. I almost turned away, but then I thought of everything I had lost by staying silent before. I rang the bell. He opened the door himself, and for a moment neither of us spoke. He looked surprised to see me, but his face softened when he saw how tired I was. He invited me in, and I sat by the fire. The room was warm, quiet, and filled with the smell of books and old wood. It felt like safety, something I had not felt in years. I told him I had not come to ask for anything. I only wanted to tell him that I was sorry. Sorry for the choices I had made, for the life I had tried to build out of fear and pride. I said that I had lived wrongly, not because I wanted to, but because I did not know another way. He listened without interrupting. His eyes were kind. When I said I was working in a hat shop now, he seemed moved. He said that honest work could heal more than money ever could. His words made me feel lighter, as if some old weight had finally fallen away. He walked me to the door and said he hoped we would meet again soon. I smiled, but in my heart I knew that we would not. I did not tell him about the debts that still followed me, or the loneliness that had become part of my life. I only thanked him and said good night. For the first time in a long while, I felt calm. When I returned to my small room, the lamp on the table burned weakly. I looked around at the quiet space that had become my world. There was a small bed, a wooden chair, and a few letters that no one had answered. I sat down and took out the money I owed to the shop owner. I had just enough to pay it in the morning. I felt tired, but it was a gentle tiredness, like a child's after a long day. I lay down, thinking of Selden's voice and how he had looked at me. For the first time in months, I was not afraid. I remember watching the light fade from the window. The city sounds grew softer, and my eyes began to close. I thought of my mother, who had always told me that beauty could save a woman. I now knew she had been wrong. Beauty could open hearts, but it could not protect the soul. What I needed was something simpler and deeper peace. And that night, I felt it. It came quietly, like sleep. The next morning, Selden came to see me. He had wanted to tell me something more, something he had not said the night before. Perhaps he had finally understood that he loved me. But when he arrived, the door was locked, and no one answered. The maid from downstairs came up and opened the door for him. The room was still. The air was calm. I was lying on the bed, as if asleep, but I did not wake. There was a small smile on my face. On the table beside me lay a letter I had written to pay my last debt, and next to it was an empty glass. No one ever knew exactly what had happened. Some said it was an accident, that I had taken too much of the medicine I used for sleep. Others said it was choice, but I think it was simply rest, the kind of rest I had been seeking for so long. Selden stood beside me for a long time. He said later that he had never seen me look so peaceful. He understood then what I had always wanted. I had never truly desired riches or power. I had only wanted a life where I could be loved without fear and live without pretending. But the world I was born into did not allow that. It offered beauty as a gift and demanded a soul in return. After I was gone, people spoke of me again. Some said I was foolish. Others said I was brave, but no one really knew the truth. They did not see the long years of small humiliations, the endless need to please, or the loneliness that comes when the world loves only your reflection. They did not know how heavy the price of beauty could be. I like to think that Selden remembered me kindly. Perhaps, sometimes, when he passed through the bright rooms of his friends, he thought of me and wondered what might have been if I had chosen love instead of fear. Perhaps he understood then that I had tried my best to live with dignity in a world that valued everything but that. If I could speak now, I would tell every young woman who dreams of wealth and beauty to be careful. The lights of the world shine brightly, but they fade fast. Do not trade your peace for a room full of strangers who call you lovely. Do not forget that your worth is not in your face, but in your heart. When I think of my life now, I see it as a long, glittering dance that ended in silence. I was the woman everyone admired, and yet no one truly saw. But even in the end, when all the laughter had gone, I had one small victory. I found truth in my own heart. I understood that love without pride and peace without fear were worth more than all the jewels in New York. That was my story, the story of a woman who lived among the rich, but died with nothing but honesty and calm. The price of beauty was high, but I paid it with my life, and in that final moment, I was free. If you liked my story, please like, comment, 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 and share.